Have you ever felt like you were living someone else's life? Like everything around you was perfectly fine, yet deep inside, you couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing? James did. He had the house, the career, and a loving wife who had been by his side for 10 years. But as he sat in his living room, sipping his morning coffee and watching the world outside his window, he couldn't help but wonder, is this all there is? That question gnawed at him, day after day, until the moment everything changed. It was the day two mysterious women moved into the house next door, and with them came a temptation James never saw coming. From that moment, his life spiraled into a series of choices that would challenge everything he thought he knew about love, loyalty, and desire. But what happens when you give in to the unknown? What happens when you leave behind the familiar for a chance at something more? Chapter 1: The Unexpected Encounter. James sat in his living room, staring blankly out the window, a half-empty cup of coffee resting on the table beside him. The gentle hum of the dishwasher was the only sound breaking the silence in the house. Outside, the sun was beginning to rise, casting a soft golden glow over the neighborhood. Normally, this would be a calming scene, but James couldn't shake the feeling of discontent gnawing at him. His life had settled into a predictable routine, one that had been the same for years. He had a steady job, a comfortable home, and Emily, his wife of 10 years, who was nothing but loving and supportive. But somewhere along the way, something had changed. Or perhaps it hadn't changed at all. Perhaps it had always been there, buried beneath the surface, a growing sense of restlessness, of boredom, that now seemed to dominate his thoughts. Emily, with her kind eyes and gentle smile, had been his rock for as long as he could remember. She was dependable, always there when he needed her, but their relationship had lost its spark. What once had been nights filled with laughter and passion had slowly transformed into quiet evenings where they barely spoke, each absorbed in their own world. James found himself thinking more and more about the life he could have had, the adventures he never pursued, and the excitement that seemed to elude him. It wasn't that he didn't love Emily. He did, or at least, he thought he did. But over time, love had become something different, something more akin to familiarity than desire. And that, he realized, was the heart of his discontent. As James pondered these thoughts, his attention was drawn to a moving truck pulling up next door. His neighborhood was quiet, a suburban enclave where everyone knew each other by name, and new faces were a rare occurrence. He watched with idle curiosity as two figures emerged from the truck. At first, he couldn't quite make them out through the glare of the sun, but as they came closer, his breath caught in his throat. The women who stepped out were unlike anyone James had ever seen. Their skin had a faint blue tint, shimmering almost like it was dusted with glitter. Their hair, long and silver, cascaded down their backs in perfect waves. They were tall, with lean, graceful figures, and they moved with an elegance that seemed unnatural, almost otherworldly. Even from a distance, James could feel an inexplicable pull toward them, a strange sensation that left him feeling both mesmerized and unnerved. As the women approached their new home, one of them glanced in his direction. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and James felt his heart skip a beat. There was something hypnotic about her gaze, something that stirred a deep, primal reaction within him. He shook his head, trying to dismiss the feeling, but the image of her lingered in his mind. James? Emily's voice called from the kitchen, snapping him out of his daze. Can you help me with the groceries? Yeah, James muttered, tearing his eyes away from the window. He stood up and walked into the kitchen, where Emily was unpacking bags of produce. As he helped her, his thoughts drifted back to the strange women next door. He hadn't seen anyone like them before, and the more he thought about them, the more intrigued he became. What were they doing in this quiet suburban neighborhood? Where had they come from? And why did he feel such a strong, inexplicable attraction to them? That night, as he lay in bed beside Emily, James found himself unable to sleep. His mind kept returning to the image of the women, especially the one who had looked at him. There was something about her that felt magnetic, as if her very presence was drawing him in. He knew it was irrational, but he couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change in some profound way. The next morning, James awoke feeling groggy and out of sorts. Emily had already left for work, leaving a note on the counter reminding him to water the garden. He groaned and rubbed his eyes, trying to shake off the strange dreams he had had the night before, dreams filled with flashes of silver hair and glowing blue skin. As he stepped outside into the crisp morning air, James's gaze was immediately drawn to the house next door. The women were outside, tending to the garden with delicate hands. Their movements were fluid, almost hypnotic, as they worked together in perfect harmony. For a moment, James considered going over to introduce himself, but something held him back. Instead, he stood there, watering his plants and stealing glances at them from the corner of his eye. To his surprise, one of the women noticed him watching. She turned and waved, her lips curving into a warm smile. "Hi there," she called out, her voice carrying across the yard. "I'm Laura." James hesitated for a moment before raising his hand in an awkward wave. Hi. I'm James. I live next door." Laura walked over to the fence that separated their yards, her movements graceful and smooth. Up close, her blue-tinted skin seemed to shimmer in the sunlight, and her silver hair looked almost ethereal. "Nice to meet you, James," she said, her smile widening. "My sister Kaya and I just moved in." "Sister?" James repeated, glancing over at the other woman, who was still working in the garden. She looked almost identical to Laura, with the same striking features and otherworldly beauty. "Yep," Laura replied, leaning casually against the fence. "We've been traveling for a while, but we're looking forward to settling down here." "Traveling?" James asked, curiosity piqued. "Where are you from?" Laura's smile faltered for a brief moment, her eyes flickering with something James couldn't quite place. "It's a long story," she said, her voice softening. "Maybe we'll tell you about it someday." Before James could ask anything else, Kaya joined them at the fence. She gave him a small nod, her gaze lingering on him for a moment longer than necessary. "We should get to know each other better," Laura suggested, her tone light and friendly. "Why don't you come over for dinner tonight?" James hesitated, glancing back toward his house. I don't know if." "Please," Laura interrupted, her smile returning. "We'd love to have you." There was something in her voice, something subtle but persuasive, that made it hard for James to refuse. He felt a strange warmth spreading through his chest, a sensation that made him feel both comforted and excited at the same time. "Okay," he said, surprising even himself. "I'll come." Laura's smile widened, and Kaya gave him a small nod of approval before they turned and walked back toward their house. As they disappeared inside, James stood there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. He had no idea why he had agreed to have dinner with them, but something about the invitation had felt irresistible. That evening, James found himself standing in front of Laura and Kaya's house, feeling a mix of anticipation and anxiety. He hadn't told Emily about the dinner. Instead, he had made up an excuse about running errands. He wasn't sure why he had lied, but a part of him knew that this dinner was something he wanted to keep to himself. As he knocked on the door, James felt his heart racing. A moment later, Laura answered, her smile as radiant as ever. "Come in," she said, stepping aside to let him enter. The inside of the house was dimly lit, with soft, ambient lighting that created an almost dreamlike atmosphere. The air was thick with a sweet, intoxicating scent that James couldn't quite place, but it made his head swim and his body tingle with a strange energy. Kaya was already seated at the dining table, her eyes fixed on him as he entered. The sisters were dressed in flowing, silken garments that clung to their bodies in a way that made it impossible for James to look away. They were both stunning, and the way they looked at him made his pulse quicken. As they sat down for dinner, the conversation flowed easily, though James found it difficult to focus on their words. His mind was clouded by their presence, by the strange scent in the air, and by the way their eyes seemed to draw him in deeper with every glance. It was as if they were emitting some kind of invisible force, a pull that made it impossible for him to think clearly. He felt the warmth of their gazes, the softness of their voices, and the intoxicating effect of their pheromones, which filled the air like a thick, invisible cloud. It was overwhelming, and yet, he found himself craving more. He couldn't explain it, but he didn't want to leave. Laura leaned forward, her hand brushing lightly against his. "We're so glad you came," she whispered, her breath warm against his skin. James's heart raced, his mind spinning with thoughts he couldn't control. He knew he should leave, that this was wrong, but the pull was too strong. He was powerless to resist. One evening, as James sat in the dimly lit living room of Laura and Kaya's house, the sisters leaned in close, their presence as intoxicating as ever. The sweet scent of their pheromones filled the air, and James felt his mind begin to cloud once again. "You're not happy, are you?" Laura asked, her voice soft and soothing. "With her, I mean." James hesitated, unsure of how to respond. He wasn't happy, that much was true. But was it fair to blame Emily for that? Or was the problem with him? "You don't have to pretend with us," Kaya added, her hand resting gently on his arm. "We can feel it, you know. The frustration, the dissatisfaction. You're not meant for that life." James swallowed hard, his thoughts spinning. They were right. He wasn't happy. But what was he supposed to do about it? "We can give you what you need," Laura continued, her voice taking on a more persuasive tone. "You don't have to be trapped anymore. You can be free, James." The words hung in the air, their meaning clear. They were offering him a way out, a chance to leave his old life behind and embrace something new, something different. For a long moment, James considered it. The idea of escaping the monotony of his life, of leaving behind the guilt and the lies, was tempting. But as he looked into their eyes, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more at play here, something he didn't fully understand. "I can't just leave her," he muttered, though even as he said the words, they felt hollow. Kaya smiled, her gaze piercing through him. "Yes, you can," she said softly. "And you will." The weeks that followed were a blur of confusion and guilt. James found himself oscillating between the two women in his life, Emily, who had grown increasingly distant as she sensed the growing chasm between them, and Laura and Kaya, who continued to seduce him with their intoxicating presence. But the more time James spent with the alien sisters, the more he began to question whether their relationship was real or merely a product of the pheromones they emitted. The line between desire and manipulation blurred, and James found himself growing increasingly paranoid. Emily's confrontations became more frequent, her suspicions growing with each passing day. One night, after a particularly heated argument, she finally confronted him. "James," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and desperation. "I know something's going on. I'm not stupid. Just tell me the truth." James stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest. The moment of truth had arrived, and there was no turning back. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice barely audible. I can't do this anymore." Emily's face crumpled in shock and disbelief. "What are you saying?" "I've met someone else," James confessed, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "Two people, actually. I've been seeing them, and I'm leaving." The silence that followed was deafening. Emily stared at him, her eyes wide with shock and betrayal. "Who are they?" she finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. James swallowed hard, his throat dry. "They're not from here," he said, struggling to find the right words. "They're different." Emily's face twisted in confusion and hurt. "What do you mean, not from here?" James hesitated, unsure of how to explain the truth. How could he possibly make her understand what had happened? The pheromones, the alien allure, it all seemed so unreal, even to him. "They're alien," he finally admitted, his voice shaking. "I don't know how else to explain it. They're from somewhere else. And they've changed me." Emily's reaction was immediate. She burst into tears, sobs racking her body as she collapsed onto the couch. "James, please," she begged, her voice broken. "Don't do this. Don't leave me." But James knew that it was too late. He had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, his heart heavy with guilt and regret. "I have to go." And with that, James turned and walked out of the house, leaving behind the life he had built with Emily, unsure of what the future held. The final confrontation with Emily left James feeling hollow, but as he walked back to Laura and Kaya's house, he couldn't help but feel a sense of inevitability about it all. He had made his choice. There was no going back now. When he arrived, Laura and Kaya were waiting for him, their eyes filled with a knowing smile. "You're finally free," Laura said softly, her hand resting on his arm. "Now, we can begin." James nodded, though a part of him still felt uneasy. There was something about their words, about the way they had manipulated him, that left him feeling uncertain. But as Kaya leaned in and kissed him, all of his doubts melted away. This was his new life now, and he had no idea what it would become. Chapter 2: The Seduction and the Consequences. James couldn't recall when the night began to blur. The dinner with Laura and Kaya seemed to dissolve into a haze of sensory overload, a potent mix of sweet pheromones, soft laughter, and delicate touches. As the night wore on, he found himself more lost in their presence than he could ever remember being with anyone else, even Emily. It was as if the very fabric of reality around him bent to their will, creating a space where time ceased to exist and desire became the only force that mattered. The dim lighting in the house heightened the surreal nature of the evening, casting long shadows over the strange, alien plants that adorned the corners of the room. They seemed to shimmer in the low light, their leaves exuding a faint, glowing mist, contributing to the heady atmosphere that clouded James's mind. "I'm glad you stayed." Laura's voice was soft, but it cut through the haze of James's thoughts like a whisper in a dream. She sat beside him, her blue-tinted hand resting gently on his thigh, and her silver hair framing her face like a halo of light. Her eyes locked onto his, and in that moment, he felt as though he were falling into her gaze, sinking into a sea of blue that swallowed him whole. Kaya appeared on his other side, as graceful as ever, and she leaned in close enough for him to feel the warmth of her breath on his neck. "There's so much more for you to experience, James," she murmured, her voice carrying an almost hypnotic quality. "You don't have to be afraid." James wanted to resist. Deep down, there was a voice in the back of his mind, faint but persistent, telling him that this was wrong. That he needed to leave. That he had a wife waiting for him at home. But that voice was drowned out by the sheer intensity of the sensations flooding his senses. The warmth of their touch, the sweet scent in the air, the soft, rhythmic music playing in the background, it was all too much. James began, but the words caught in his throat. He was unsure of what he even wanted to say. Laura leaned in closer, her lips brushing against his ear. "Just let go, James," she whispered, her voice as smooth as silk. "You've been holding back for too long. You deserve more. We can give you more." Kaya's hand slid over his chest, her touch sending shivers down his spine. "You don't have to pretend anymore," she said, her tone laced with a seductive promise. "We know what you really want." James's breath quickened, his heart pounding in his chest as he felt himself being pulled deeper into their orbit. The world outside their home no longer mattered. Emily, his job, his responsibilities, all of it faded into the background, leaving only the overwhelming desire to be with them. The pull was undeniable, irresistible, and so, James gave in. Hours later, James found himself lying in Laura and Kaya's bed, his body exhausted but his mind racing. The events of the night had unfolded in a whirlwind of passion and indulgence, a blur of sensations that left him feeling both exhilarated and drained. He stared up at the ceiling, his thoughts a tangled mass of guilt and satisfaction. He had crossed a line. There was no going back now, but as he lay there, with Laura and Kaya curled up on either side of him, their presence still intoxicating even in the aftermath of everything, James felt something strange. A sense of clarity, perhaps. A realization that this wasn't just about physical desire or escaping the monotony of his life. There was something deeper at play, something he couldn't quite put into words. "I should go," he said quietly, more to himself than to them. He knew he couldn't stay forever. Eventually, he would have to face the consequences of his actions. Laura stirred beside him, her hand resting on his chest as she looked up at him with those mesmerizing blue eyes. "Why?" she asked, her voice soft and melodic. "You don't have to leave, James." "Not yet." Kaya, still half asleep, murmured in agreement. "Stay with us," she whispered, her hand sliding over his arm. "You don't need to go back." For a moment, James considered it. The idea of staying, of abandoning his old life and giving in completely to this new reality, was tempting. But the guilt gnawing at the edges of his consciousness wouldn't let him fully commit to that idea. He had responsibilities. A wife. A life that he couldn't just walk away from. "I have to go," he repeated, more firmly this time. He gently extricated himself from their embrace and stood up, pulling on his clothes with a sense of urgency. Laura watched him with a knowing smile, as if she understood something he didn't. "We'll be here when you're ready, James," she said, her voice filled with a quiet confidence. "We're not going anywhere." James didn't respond. He couldn't. Instead, he made his way to the door, his heart heavy with the weight of what he had done. As he stepped outside into the cool night air, the world seemed to shift back into focus. The intoxicating haze that had clouded his mind for hours began to lift, and with it came the full realization of the gravity of his actions. He had betrayed Emily. The walk back to his house felt longer than it should have, each step weighed down by the guilt that now pressed heavily on his chest. His thoughts raced, his mind replaying the events of the night over and over again. How had he let it happen? How had he allowed himself to fall so deeply into the allure of Laura and Kaya? By the time he reached his front door, James felt sick to his stomach. He paused for a moment, taking a deep breath before unlocking the door and stepping inside. The house was dark, save for the dim light of the hallway lamp that Emily always left on when she went to bed. James stood in the doorway for a long moment, his hand resting on the doorknob as he debated what to do next. Should he wake her? Should he confess? The thought of telling Emily the truth made his heart race with anxiety. He wasn't ready for that conversation. Not yet. Instead, he quietly made his way to the guest bedroom and lay down on the bed, staring up at the ceiling as the guilt continued to gnaw at him. He had crossed a line, and there was no turning back now. The only question that remained was what he would do next. Days turned into weeks, and James found himself caught between two worlds. On one hand, there was Emily, the woman he had built a life with, the woman who loved him and trusted him. On the other hand, there were Laura and Kaya, the enigmatic sisters who had awakened something within him that he hadn't even known existed. The pull of the alien women was strong, stronger than anything he had ever experienced. Whenever he was near them, it was as if the rest of the world melted away, leaving only the overwhelming desire to be with them. The pheromones they emitted clouded his judgment, making it difficult to think clearly. Every time he tried to pull away, he found himself drawn back into their orbit. But the more time James spent with Laura and Kaya, the more he began to notice subtle changes in himself. His thoughts became clouded, his emotions more volatile. He found himself snapping at Emily for no reason, growing irritated at the smallest things. The guilt that had once weighed heavily on him now seemed to fade into the background, replaced by a growing sense of detachment. Emily, for her part, sensed that something was wrong. She could feel James pulling away from her, though she couldn't quite put her finger on what had changed. She asked him about it, of course, tried to talk to him, tried to understand what was going on. But James always brushed her off, offering vague excuses about stress at work or needing some space, and so, their relationship began to unravel. Chapter 3: The seduction deepens. James had moved in with Laura and Kaya, leaving behind everything he knew, everything he once cared about. The intoxicating influence of their pheromones had reached the deepest corners of his mind, clouding his judgment and turning his desires against him. He felt as if his very soul had been twisted into something unrecognizable, but it didn't matter anymore. The house, which once seemed so warm and inviting, now felt otherworldly. The faint glow of alien plants, the thick, sweet smell in the air that never seemed to dissipate, everything seemed tailored to keep him in a perpetual state of desire and confusion. Time became a blur. Days melted into nights, and James often found himself unable to remember how much time had passed since he had left his wife. The only constant was the presence of Laura and Kaya, who seemed to always know exactly what he needed, exactly when to touch him or speak the words that made him forget everything outside their small world. It was during one of those endless nights that Laura turned to him, her eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. "You've come so far, James," she said, her voice soft and soothing, but with an edge that made his skin prickle. "But there's more. There's always more." Kaya, seated on the other side of him, placed a hand on his chest. Do you feel it? She asked, her voice a low whisper. The pull? James nodded slowly. He could feel something, a weight, a presence that seemed to grow inside of him, something that had been planted there by them. He didn't know what it was, but he knew it was changing him. He could sense it in the way he thought, the way he acted. He wasn't the man he used to be. Not even close. I don't understand, he murmured, his voice distant even to his own ears. What's happening to me? Laura's smile widened slightly. You're becoming who you were meant to be. Before he could ask what that meant, Kaya leaned in closer, her lips brushing against his ear. There are things about us, James, things that you don't know yet, she whispered. But you will. In time, you will. Weeks passed, though James had no clear sense of how long. His mind was clouded by the constant presence of Laura and Kaya. He had no job, no responsibilities, no life outside of their house. Every day was a blur of intoxicating interactions, physical indulgence, and fleeting moments of clarity that were quickly swallowed up by the haze of desire. But as the days turned into weeks, James began to notice something else, something that sent a shiver down his spine. It started with small things. Laura and Kaya would occasionally speak to each other in a language he couldn't understand, their words soft and melodic, but carrying an undercurrent of something far more sinister. He would catch glimpses of them watching him, their eyes filled with something that wasn't quite love or affection, but something colder, more calculating. And then there were the dreams. Vivid, disorienting dreams that left him shaken when he awoke. In these dreams, he saw Laura and Kaya standing over him, their faces expressionless, their hands reaching out to him as if to claim him. He would wake up drenched in sweat, his heart pounding, the faint scent of their pheromones lingering in the air. It was during one of these sleepless nights that James found himself standing in front of a mirror in the bathroom, staring at his reflection. The man who looked back at him was someone he barely recognized. His skin was pale, his eyes hollow, and there was a strange discoloration spreading across his chest, a faint, bluish tint that mirrored the skin of Laura and Kaya. Panic surged through him, and for the first time since he had left Emily, James felt a powerful sense of dread. He rushed out of the bathroom, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Laura and Kaya were sitting in the living room, their eyes locking onto him as soon as he entered. What's happening to me? He demanded, his voice trembling. Laura and Kaya exchanged a glance before standing up and walking toward him. Laura placed a hand on his chest, her touch cool against his skin. You're changing, James, she said softly. You've been exposed to us for so long, and now, your body is adapting. Adapting? James repeated, his voice filled with disbelief. To what? Kaya smiled, her eyes gleaming. To us. Chapter 4, The truth unveiled. The full weight of their words hit James like a punch to the gut. He had always known, on some level, that Laura and Kaya weren't like anyone else. But he had never truly understood the extent of their power, the depth of their influence over him. Now, standing there in the middle of their living room, his skin slowly turning the same shade of blue as theirs, James realized that he had been manipulated from the very beginning. We chose you, Laura said, her voice as calm and soothing as ever. We saw something in you, something that made you susceptible. James took a step back, his heart pounding in his chest. Susceptible to what? He asked, his voice rising in fear and anger. Kaya stepped forward, her expression unreadable. To us. To our pheromones, our presence. You were vulnerable, James. You were looking for something more than what your life with Emily could offer. And we gave it to you. James shook his head, disbelief and betrayal coursing through him. You manipulated me, he said, his voice trembling. You used me. Laura's eyes softened slightly, but there was no apology in her voice. We didn't force you to do anything, James. We simply opened a door, and you chose to walk through it. James felt his legs weaken, and he sank onto the couch, his mind racing. Everything that had happened since the day they moved in next door, everything, had been part of their plan. They had used their pheromones, their charm, their otherworldly beauty to ensnare him, to make him their puppet. And now, he was becoming one of them. What happens to me now? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Kaya sat down beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder. "You're changing, James," she said softly. "But it's not a bad thing. You'll be stronger, more powerful than you've ever been. You'll be, like us." James swallowed hard, his throat dry. "And if I don't want to change?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Laura's gaze hardened slightly, though her voice remained gentle. "It's too late for that, James. The process has already begun. There's no going back now." The words hit him like a punch to the gut, and James felt a surge of fear unlike anything he had ever felt before. He had been caught in their web, and now, there was no escape. He was becoming something else, something not quite human, and the worst part was that he had chosen this fate. He had walked willingly into their trap, blinded by his own desires and discontent. Days turned into weeks, and the changes in James's body became more pronounced. His skin had turned a pale shade of blue, his hair had begun to thin, and his eyes had taken on a faint, glowing quality. He felt stronger, faster, but he also felt more detached from his own emotions, more distant from the man he had once been. Laura and Kaya continued to reassure him that everything was going according to plan, that this was what he had been destined for all along. But James couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. He had lost control of his own life, his own body, and now, he was nothing more than a pawn in their game. It wasn't until one fateful evening that the truth finally came crashing down on him. James had been sitting in the living room, staring blankly at the television, when he heard a knock at the door. It was a strange sound. No one ever visited Laura and Kaya's house. He stood up slowly, his heart racing, and walked to the door. When he opened it, he was met with a sight that took his breath away. Emily stood on the doorstep, her face pale and drawn, her eyes filled with a mixture of shock and horror. "James," she whispered, her voice trembling. What happened to you?" Chapter 5, the final choice. For a long moment, James and Emily stared at each other in stunned silence. Emily's eyes were wide with disbelief as she took in the sight of him, his blue-tinted skin, his hollow eyes, the unmistakable signs of the transformation he had undergone. She looked as though she could hardly recognize him, as though the man standing before her was a stranger. "Emily," James said, his voice hoarse. But he didn't know what to say. How could he explain any of this? How could he make her understand what had happened to him, what he had allowed to happen? Tears filled Emily's eyes, and she shook her head. "What have they done to you?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "I tried to find you. I called, I went to your work, I didn't know where you were. And now, you're. Imagine a man standing in the rain, clutching a piece of paper that could change his entire life. His clothes are soaked, his hands trembling, but it's not the cold that's making him shiver. It's the weight of the decision he has to make. On that piece of paper is an address, a place he's never been to, but one that holds the answers to questions he's been running from for years. What would you do if the choice in your hands could rewrite your past, fix what's broken, but risk everything you have left? Would you take the step, not knowing if it leads to redemption or deeper regret?" As the man looks up, the rain falling harder, he knows one thing for certain: this moment will change everything. And so, he takes the first step toward the unknown. Now, let's go back to where it all began, before this life-altering moment ever existed, and understand what led him to the edge of this choice. Chapter 1, Laughter Among the Stars. The stars sparkled overhead in the nebula known as Giant's Cluster, where planets of vibrant colors orbited their suns in a coordinated cosmic dance. In this corner of the universe, lived a race of beings far beyond Earth's comprehension, known as the Veldrians. They were an intelligent, beautiful, and near-perfect species. Their skin shimmered in various shades of blue, and their sleek, slender forms were a marvel to behold. But what set them apart the most was their advanced technology, which allowed them to travel vast distances across galaxies, and their heightened intellect that surpassed any other species known in the cosmos. To them, Earth was a primitive rock, a planet filled with crude, emotion-driven beings, a backwater in the grand expanse of the universe. The Veldrian girls, in particular, loved to make jokes about Earth and its inhabitants, their laughter ringing out across their silver, futuristic halls. Serena, the leader of a close-knit group of Veldrian women, chuckled as she pulled up an Earth broadcast on her holographic screen. Look at them. They can barely even fly a ship beyond their own moon. It's pathetic. Yelena, the youngest of the group, sneered, her long, crystalline hair swaying with every movement. I can't believe they think they're special. They don't even know we're watching them. The others joined in, their melodic laughter blending into a harmonious sound that filled the room. Earth, with its primitive cultures and slow progress, was nothing but a joke to them. The Valdrians had long surpassed the need for emotion-driven relationships or reproduction the way humans did. Their advanced science allowed them to select traits, perfecting their race without the need for intimacy or weakness. Yet, beneath the surface of their derision, a subtle curiosity stirred, one they would never admit openly. Despite their superiority, the human species still exhibited traits that baffled and intrigued them: love, passion, perseverance in the face of insurmountable odds. These qualities, though seen as flaws by the Valdrians, sparked questions in their minds, but they buried them deep under layers of pride. Chapter 2, A Visitor from the Stars. Meanwhile, on Earth, life continued in its predictable patterns. Leo Carter was a man of modest means, an aerospace engineer who had always looked to the stars. He often found himself dreaming of what lay beyond the skies, wondering if there were beings out there who had already conquered the universe. Little did he know, he was being watched, observed by beings whose curiosity about him had taken a surprising turn. One night, as Leo stood outside his small cabin in the woods, gazing up at the star-streaked sky, something extraordinary happened. A flash of light burst through the atmosphere, and a sleek, silver ship hovered above him. The air vibrated with energy as a beam of light descended, pulling him up toward the ship. Inside, Leo found himself standing before the Valdrian women, Serena, Yelena, and the others. Their blue, luminescent skin seemed to glow in the dim light of the ship's interior. They were ethereal, unlike anything he had ever imagined. Serena stepped forward, her eyes scanning Leo with a mixture of disdain and interest. "A human," she said, her voice soft yet commanding. "So primitive. So unremarkable." Leo blinked, trying to make sense of the situation. "Where am I? Who are you?" Yelena snickered, crossing her arms. "You're in our ship, human. And we are the Valdrians, far superior to your kind." Despite their mocking tone, Leo wasn't intimidated. Instead, he found himself intrigued. "If you're so superior, then why bring me here?" The room fell silent. Serena's eyes narrowed as she studied Leo. "Curiosity," she finally admitted. "We wanted to see what made your species so resilient." Leo smirked. "Resilient, huh? That's an interesting way to put it. So, what now? You going to experiment on me or something?" Serena shook her head, her long, silken hair shimmering. "No. We're not interested in your biology. We've already mastered that. What we want to understand is something deeper." Leo tilted his head, intrigued. "Deeper?" Yelena sighed, clearly frustrated by his lack of understanding. "Emotions. Love. Attachment. You humans are driven by these irrational feelings." Serena silenced Yelena with a wave of her hand. "We've evolved past the need for such weaknesses, but we've seen how it fuels your species. We don't understand it, and that makes it dangerous." Leo chuckled. "Dangerous? Love?" Serena's gaze hardened. "Yes. But we're going to find out exactly how dangerous it is." Chapter 3, The experiment begins. Over the next few weeks, Leo found himself subjected to an experiment like no other. The Valdrians, particularly Serena and Yelena, observed him closely as they attempted to provoke emotional responses in him. They wanted to understand how human emotions worked, why they drove people to irrational actions, and how they affected decision-making. At first, Leo resisted, keeping his emotions in check as much as possible. But as the days passed, he couldn't help but form a strange connection with the alien women. Despite their cold, analytical nature, there was something in them that fascinated him. They were so advanced, so perfect, and yet, they were missing something fundamental. It was Yelena who first began to soften. She had always been the most curious about human emotions, despite her outward disdain for them. One night, as Leo sat alone in his quarters, she entered the room, her usually sharp expression softened. "Do you miss it?" she asked. Leo looked up at her, surprised. "Miss what?" "Earth. Your home. The people you care about." Leo shrugged. "Yeah, I guess. But it's not like I had much going on there. I was just an average guy, living an average life." Yelena sat down beside him, her glowing blue skin casting a soft light in the dim room. "We don't have that here," she admitted. "We don't have families. We don't have love. It's all science. Efficiency." Leo studied her for a moment before speaking. "And you're okay with that?" Yelena hesitated. "I was. But now, I'm not so sure." Chapter 4: Unexpected Connections. As time went on, Leo and the Valdrians began to form an unlikely bond. What had started as a clinical experiment was slowly turning into something much more complex. The alien women, once cold and detached, found themselves feeling emotions they had long since abandoned. And Leo, who had always felt like an outsider on Earth, was beginning to feel a strange sense of belonging among them. Serena, the leader, was the last to admit it, but even she couldn't deny the changes happening within her. She found herself drawn to Leo in ways she couldn't explain. His resilience, his humor, his capacity for love, it was something she had never experienced before. And it frightened her. One night, as Leo sat in the observation room, Serena approached him, her usually composed demeanor faltering. "You've changed us," she said softly. Leo looked up at her, surprised. "What do you mean?" Serena hesitated, her eyes searching his for answers. "We were perfect. Emotionless. Efficient. But now I feel things I've never felt before. And it's because of you." Leo stood, stepping closer to her. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing." Serena's eyes glistened with something unfamiliar, something she had never allowed herself to feel. "But emotions are dangerous. They make us vulnerable." Leo smiled. "Yeah, they do. But they also make us human." Chapter 5: Consequences. The bond between Leo and the Valdrians grew stronger with each passing day. What had started as an experiment had blossomed into something much more profound, an emotional connection that none of them had anticipated. But with this newfound connection came unforeseen consequences. One morning, Yelena approached Leo with a look of shock on her face. "Leo, there's something you need to know." Leo frowned. "What is it?" Yelena hesitated before speaking. "We're pregnant." Leo blinked, stunned. "Pregnant? How is that even possible?" Yelena shook her head, clearly just as confused. "We don't know. Our species doesn't reproduce like humans do, but, somehow, it happened." Leo's mind raced as he tried to process the information. "All of you?" Yelena nodded. "Yes. All of us." The news sent shockwaves through the Valdrian ship. The women, once so confident in their superiority, now found themselves facing a situation they had never anticipated. Their perfect, emotionless existence had been shattered by something they didn't understand, something they had mocked and ridiculed for so long. Serena, who had always prided herself on her control, was the most affected. She had spent her entire life believing that emotions were a weakness, that they made beings less efficient. And now, here she was, pregnant with the child of a human man, overwhelmed by feelings she had never thought she could experience. "I don't understand," she confessed to Leo one night. "How could this happen? How could I have let this happen?" Leo took her hand, his touch gentle. "Maybe it's not something you can control. Maybe it's just life." Serena's eyes filled with tears, tears she had never shed before. "I don't know what to do." Leo smiled softly. "You don't have to know. You just have to feel." Chapter 6: A New Beginning. As the weeks passed, the Valdrian women began to adjust to their new reality. The pregnancies, though unexpected, brought with them a sense of hope, a sense of something greater than themselves. For the first time in their lives, they were experiencing emotions they had never thought possible. And while it was terrifying, it was also exhilarating. Leo, too, had changed. He had always dreamed of exploring the stars, but he had never imagined that he would find a family among them. The Valdrians, once so distant and cold, had become his companions, his partners, his family. Serena, Yelena, and the others gave birth to hybrid children, beings that were a perfect blend of human and Valdrian. These children, born from an unexpected union, represented a new beginning for both species, a future where emotions and intellect could coexist, where love and logic could thrive side by side. And as Leo stood among them, holding his newborn child in his arms, he couldn't help but smile. The stars had always been a source of mystery and wonder for him. But now, they held something even more precious, a family, a future, and a love that spanned the galaxies. Chapter 7, New Life Among the Stars. The birth of the hybrid children marked a monumental shift not only in the lives of Leo and the Valdrian women, but also in the delicate balance of power and progress within the entire Valdrian civilization. The silver halls of their ship, once cold and sterile, were now filled with the soft cries and laughter of new life, life that neither side had expected, yet both were beginning to cherish. Leo watched as the hybrid children grew rapidly, their development accelerated by the Valdrian genetic traits. They were unlike anything the universe had ever seen. Their skin, a blend of human and Valdrian hues, shimmered with an otherworldly light, and their eyes held the wisdom of both worlds. These children possessed the emotional depth of humanity and the intellectual brilliance of the Valdrians, making them something entirely new. Serena, who had once been so determined to remain detached, found herself fully immersed in motherhood. The experience softened her in ways she had never thought possible. She had always viewed emotions as a weakness, but now she saw their strength. She watched in awe as her child, Kalen, named after a Valdrian word meaning hope, learned to walk, his tiny hands reaching for the stars with a curiosity she had once dismissed as primitive. "It's strange," she confessed to Leo one night as they stood on the observation deck, watching the endless expanse of space. "I spent my whole life believing that emotions made us lesser. But now, I can't imagine life without them." Leo smiled, placing a hand on her shoulder. "They don't make you lesser. They make you more." Yelena, too, had changed. She had always been the most curious about human emotions, and now she was fully immersed in them. Her child, Aria, had inherited her mother's analytical mind but also Leo's warmth and empathy. Watching Aria interact with the other children, Yelena couldn't help but marvel at how different, and yet how similar, they all were. "We've created something beautiful," she said to Leo one day as they watched the children play. "Something that's never existed before." Leo nodded, his heart swelling with pride. "Yeah. We have." But as the hybrid children grew, so did the questions surrounding their future. What role would they play in the universe? Would they return to Earth, or would they remain among the stars with the Valdrians? These questions lingered in the air, unresolved, as the children continued to thrive in their unique environment. Chapter 8, The Council of Elders. While Leo, Serena, Yelena, and the others adjusted to their new reality, not everyone within the Valdrian civilization was as accepting. The Council of Elders, the ruling body of the Valdrian race, had long maintained strict control over their society. Emotions were seen as a weakness, reproduction was a matter of genetic perfection, and any deviation from their advanced systems was met with suspicion and disdain. News of the hybrid children reached the council, and their response was swift. A delegation was sent to the ship, led by Elder Kala, a stern and unyielding figure who had always been one of the most vocal proponents of Valdrian superiority. Kala's arrival was preceded by a cold, tense atmosphere, and when she stepped onto the ship, her icy gaze immediately settled on the children. "This is an abomination," she declared, her voice sharp and cutting. "You've allowed emotions to cloud your judgment, and now you've created a dangerous precedent." Serena stepped forward, her back straight, her chin held high. "These children are not an abomination, Elder Kala. They are the future." Kala's eyes narrowed. "The future of what? A weak, emotional race?" We have spent millennia perfecting ourselves, and now you've thrown that all away for the sake of sentimentality. Leo, standing beside Serena, felt a surge of anger. These kids aren't weak. They're stronger than you can imagine. They have the best of both worlds, human and Valdrian. Kala scoffed, her gaze shifting to Leo. Humans are inferior. We have always known this. Your emotions make you reckless, your weaknesses hold you back. And now you've infected our people with those same flaws. Before Leo could respond, Serena spoke, her voice calm but firm. These children are not a flaw, Kala. They are the evolution of both our species. They possess the intellect of the Valdrians and the emotional strength of humans. Together, they are something greater than either of us alone. Kala's lips thinned into a tight line. The council will not allow this. These children will be taken into custody, studied, and controlled. We cannot allow them to threaten the balance we have maintained for so long. Serena's eyes flashed with anger. You will not take them. The tension in the room was palpable. Kala stared down Serena, her authority unquestioned for centuries. But now, for the first time, she was facing resistance from one of her own. You are letting your emotions cloud your judgment, Serena, Kala said coldly. And it will be your downfall. But Serena stood her ground. No, Kala. It is you who is blind. These children are the future, and I will not let you destroy that future because of your fear. Leo watched in awe as Serena, once so detached and emotionless, now stood fiercely in defense of their children. She had transformed, not just as a leader but as a mother, and her love for their children gave her a strength Kala could never understand. Kala, sensing that she could not win this battle here, narrowed her eyes. The council will hear of this. And when they do, you will be held accountable for your actions. With that, she turned and left, leaving a heavy silence in her wake. Chapter 9. The rebellion begins. As soon as Kala left the ship, Leo and Serena knew that they had only bought themselves a short reprieve. The Council of Elders would not back down so easily. Their rigid beliefs and control over the Valdrian society meant that they would stop at nothing to maintain the status quo. We have to prepare, Serena said, her voice steady but filled with determination. The council will come for us. And when they do, we need to be ready. Leo nodded. What are you thinking? Serena paced the room, her mind racing. The Valdrian people have never questioned the council's authority. But if we can show them what these children represent, if we can prove that emotions and intellect can coexist, they might stand with us. Yelena, who had been listening quietly, stepped forward. The council controls everything. The people won't rise up unless they see that the council is wrong. Leo crossed his arms, deep in thought. Then we need to show them. We need to give them a reason to believe that there's a better way. Serena nodded, her resolve hardening. We'll broadcast a message. A message to the entire Valdrian civilization. We'll show them the children, explain what they represent, and why the council is wrong. Yelena looked uncertain. What if they don't listen? What if they see the children as a threat? Leo smiled. Then we'll give them something they can't ignore. Over the next few days, the ship was a flurry of activity. Leo and the Valdrians worked tirelessly to prepare their message. They recorded footage of the hybrid children, showcasing their intelligence, compassion, and potential. They crafted a speech that would resonate with the Valdrian people, appealing to their logic and their sense of progress. When the message was ready, Serena stood before the camera, her eyes burning with determination. To my fellow Valdrians, she began, her voice steady and strong. For millennia, we have believed that emotions are a weakness. That they make us lesser. But I have seen a different truth. I have seen that emotions, when combined with intellect, can create something greater than we ever imagined. She paused, her gaze intense. These children are not a threat. They are the future. They possess the best of both our worlds, our intellect and human emotional strength. They are the next step in our evolution. And I will not allow fear to destroy that future. The message was broadcast across the Valdrian communication networks, reaching every corner of their civilization. And as the people watched, they began to question everything they had been taught. For the first time, they saw that there might be another way, one that didn't require the cold, emotionless existence they had been conditioned to accept, but the council was not so easily swayed. Chapter 10, War Among the Stars. The Council of Elders responded swiftly and decisively. Kala and her forces descended upon the ship, intent on taking the hybrid children into custody and silencing Serena, Leo, and the others once and for all. The Valdrian people, though intrigued by the message, were still divided. Some stood with the council, while others began to see the truth in Serena's words. As Kala's ships approached, Leo and Serena prepared for battle. They had no choice but to defend themselves and their children. The once peaceful ship now buzzed with the sounds of preparation, as defensive systems were activated and strategies were hastily put into place. "We can't let them take the children," Serena said, her voice filled with a fierce protectiveness that Leo had come to admire. "They won't," Leo assured her, gripping her hand tightly. "We'll fight. Together." The battle that followed was unlike anything Leo had ever experienced. Valdrian ships clashed in the cold vacuum of space, their sleek forms darting through the stars like silver arrows. Laser blasts illuminated the darkness, and explosions echoed across the void. Inside the ship, Leo and Serena fought side by side, their bond stronger than ever. Yelena and the others joined them, each fighting not only for their own survival, but for the future of their children. But the council was relentless. Kala, driven by her belief in Valdrian superiority, pushed her forces harder, determined to crush the rebellion and maintain control over their civilization. As the battle raged on, Leo found himself facing Kala in a final confrontation. The elder Valdrian stood before him, her eyes cold and calculating. "You think you can change the course of an entire civilization?" Kala sneered. "You're nothing but a primitive human." Leo stood his ground, his eyes blazing with defiance. "I'm not trying to change your civilization, Kala. I'm trying to save it." Kala scoffed. "Save it? From what?" "From yourselves," Leo said, his voice steady. "You've spent so long trying to eliminate emotions, trying to perfect yourselves, that you've forgotten what it means to live. To love. To hope. These children, they're the proof that there's another way. A better way." Kala's eyes narrowed. "I will not allow you to destroy everything we've built." But before she could strike, Serena appeared at Leo's side, her voice filled with the strength of a mother protecting her children. "You already have, Kala." Together, Leo and Serena fought back against Kala, their combined strength overpowering the elder Valdrian. And as Kala fell, defeated, the remaining council forces began to falter. The battle was over. The rebellion had won. Chapter 11, A New Era. With Kala and the council defeated, the Valdrian people were finally free to chart a new course for their civilization. The hybrid children, once seen as a threat, were now celebrated as the future. Their unique blend of intellect and emotion gave the Valdrians a new perspective on life, one that embraced both logic and love, science and compassion. Serena, Yelena, and the others became leaders in this new era, guiding their people toward a future where emotions were no longer seen as weaknesses, but as strengths. And Leo, once an ordinary man from Earth, found himself at the center of this incredible transformation. As the years passed, the hybrid children grew into leaders of their own, helping to bridge the gap between humans and Valdrians. They traveled between Earth and the stars, building alliances and forging new relationships that would shape the future of both species. And through it all, Leo and Serena stood together, their bond stronger than ever. They had faced impossible odds, fought against centuries of tradition, and emerged victorious. In the end, they had created something more than just a family, they had created a future.
Chapter 1, The Encounter. The alien girl stood in the sterile, futuristic lounge of a hidden spacecraft, her blue-tinted skin shimmering under the soft, diffused lights that filled the room. Her sharp, luminous eyes scanned the human before her, unimpressed by the false bravado he attempted to maintain. The air was still, but the tension was palpable as her entourage, equally enigmatic and dangerously beautiful, watched from the background, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. human, she spoke in a voice that was at once melodic and chilling, her gaze piercing through him as though she could see past his skin and bones. "Show what you're hiding under your clothes, dirty animal." Her words were not a request but a command, underlined by a layer of contempt that only heightened the divide between them. The man stood frozen, his mind racing. He had been captured by these alien women, these ethereal beings with their perfect forms and flawless beauty, only hours ago. The technology they possessed was beyond anything he had ever seen, even beyond anything his government had dared to dream of. He was a spy, an expert at uncovering secrets, but now he stood on the other side of the game, a mouse in a trap. What do you mean?" he stammered, trying to buy himself a few seconds to think. The alien girl narrowed her eyes, her lips curving into a mocking smile. She moved closer, the silver-white strands of her hair falling elegantly around her flawless face. "You know what I mean, human. There's no use pretending. We've seen what you hide beneath those rags you call clothing. We've studied your kind for longer than you can comprehend." He swallowed hard. Was it some kind of advanced scanning technology? Did they know about the hidden transmitter embedded in his skin? Or was it something deeper, something more primal they sought to uncover? The others in the room moved closer as well, their movements synchronized and graceful, like predators circling prey. They had him surrounded, and escape seemed impossible. His heart pounded in his chest, not only from fear but from the overwhelming presence of these beings. Their beauty was unnatural, almost painful to behold, like looking directly into the sun. "Do as she says, human," one of the others hissed softly, her voice carrying the same disdain as the leader. "Show us your secrets." Chapter 2, Secrets Unveiled. The man hesitated, his hands shaking as they reached for the zipper of his jacket. He glanced nervously around the room, looking for any opportunity to make a break for it, but there was none. Even if he could escape the room, where would he go? He was on their ship, possibly light years away from Earth. His only chance was to comply, to figure out what they wanted. He unzipped the jacket slowly, revealing a simple black shirt underneath. His body was tense, and his mind was racing. Beneath the fabric of his clothing, just under his skin, lay the transmitter, a device so small that even the most advanced Earth technology couldn't detect it. But these aliens, they were different. They had scanned him, examined him, and yet, they hadn't made a move to remove the device. What were they really after? As he peeled off the shirt, he could feel their eyes on him, not in a way that felt voyeuristic, but as if they were analyzing every muscle, every pore, every heartbeat. Their expressions were unreadable, their perfect faces giving nothing away. The alien leader, the one who had spoken first, stepped even closer. Her icy blue eyes locked onto his bare skin as if searching for something unseen. "You think we're interested in your primitive weapons, your crude technology," she scoffed, her voice dripping with superiority. "We're not here for your tools, human. We're here for something much more valuable. Something your kind has yet to understand." His heart skipped a beat. What could they possibly want? What could he have that was more valuable than the intelligence he carried? "You still don't see it, do you?" she continued, tilting her head slightly, as if amused by his confusion. "We're not interested in what you hide under your clothes. We're interested in what you hide under your skin, under your mind." Chapter 3, The Mind Trap. The words hit him like a freight train. His mind? They wanted something from his mind. The fear intensified, but so did the questions. How could they access his thoughts, his memories? Was this some form of telepathy? The leader reached out, her hand hovering just above his chest. He could feel a strange energy emanating from her, a force that made the hair on his arms stand up. She didn't touch him, but it felt as if she was pulling something from him, something deep within. "You carry it within you," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but her words thundered in his ears. "The key to the future. The key to our survival. Your kind doesn't even know it yet, but we do. And we will take it." His thoughts raced as he struggled to understand what she was talking about. What could he possibly carry that these advanced beings needed? His head throbbed with the strain of trying to piece it all together, and then, as if a switch had been flipped, he remembered the dream. The dream he had had every night since he was a child. It was always the same, a vast, endless expanse of stars and a voice calling to him from the void. A voice that promised answers, power, but also danger. He had always dismissed it as a recurring nightmare, a product of his overactive imagination. But now, standing before these alien beings, it felt like something more. "Ah," the leader said softly, a smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "You're beginning to understand." He shook his head, trying to push the thoughts away, but it was too late. The connection had been made, and the aliens were pulling the memories from him, unraveling the mystery that had haunted him his entire life. Chapter 4, A Dangerous Bargain. The leader stepped back, her expression unreadable, but there was a glint of satisfaction in her eyes. "You've been chosen, human," she said, her voice carrying a weight that sent chills down his spine. "Whether you like it or not, you are the key. You will help us survive, or you will die." His throat was dry, and his voice cracked when he spoke. What do you want from me?" The alien girl didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked at him with a mixture of pity and amusement. "You think you have a choice in this?" she asked softly. "You're already part of the plan." Before he could respond, the others moved in closer, their glowing eyes locking onto him like vultures circling their prey. There was no escape, no bargaining. They had made up their minds, and his fate was sealed. The leader leaned in, her breath cool against his skin. "We will extract what we need, but there's a way for you to survive. A way for you to become more than you are." His heart pounded in his chest. "What are you talking about?" "You help us," she said simply. "Become one of us. And in return, we will give you what your kind has always sought, immortality." Chapter 5, The Transformation. The man's mind reeled. Immortality? Become one of them? The offer was both terrifying and tempting. Could he trust them? Could he survive whatever it was they had planned for him? The thought of living forever, of transcending his human limitations, was a dream many had, but at what cost? The leader's eyes softened slightly, as if sensing his hesitation. "This is your only chance, human. The process will change you, yes, but you will retain your memories, your essence. You will become something greater." He thought of Earth, of the people he had left behind. Could he abandon them for the promise of eternal life? Could he betray his own species? But then again, did it matter? He was already a prisoner on this ship, surrounded by beings who could crush him without a second thought. The others in the room watched silently, their expressions unreadable. They were waiting for his decision, and time was running out. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do I have to do?" Chapter 6, The Ritual. The leader smiled, a look of triumph flashing in her eyes. "You've made the right choice." She stepped back, and the others moved forward, forming a circle around him. The lights in the room dimmed, and a low hum filled the air. The man's heart raced as he realized he was about to undergo something far beyond his understanding. The leader raised her arms, and the energy in the room shifted. He could feel it pressing down on him, invading his mind, his body. His skin tingled, and he gasped as the sensation intensified, spreading through his veins like wildfire. His vision blurred, and the room around him began to dissolve. He was no longer standing in the alien ship but floating in a vast, star-filled void. The voice from his dreams echoed around him, calling him, beckoning him forward. "You are the key," it whispered. "You are the beginning and the end." His body trembled as the energy consumed him, reshaping him, transforming him into something new. His mind expanded, and for the first time in his life, he saw the universe for what it truly was, an endless web of possibilities, a never-ending cycle of life and death. Chapter 7, The New Beginning. When he awoke, he was no longer the man he had been. His skin shimmered with the same blue hue as the aliens around him, and his eyes glowed with the same ethereal light. He was one of them now, but he was also something more. The leader stood before him, her expression unreadable. "Welcome to your new life," she said softly. He looked down at his hands, flexing his fingers. He could feel the power coursing through him, the knowledge of the universe at his fingertips. But there was also a heaviness, a burden that came with his new existence. "What now?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with uncertainty. The leader smiled, but it was a cold, distant smile. "Now, you serve us. Together, we will reshape the universe." And with those words, he knew there was no turning back. He had made his choice, and the cost of immortality was higher than he could have ever imagined. The alien girl watched him closely, her piercing eyes never leaving his as she whispered, "Welcome to eternity, human." Chapter 8, The Weight of Eternity. The realization of what he had become settled heavily on his shoulders as he gazed into the infinite darkness of space through the ship's transparent wall. His reflection stared back at him, a being of immense power, glowing with the same eerie blue light as the alien leader and her kin. Yet, beneath the surface, he was still human, still tethered to the thoughts, feelings, and fears that once defined him. The alien leader, who had orchestrated his transformation, stood beside him, her posture calm and commanding. She regarded him not as a newly created equal but as a tool, a weapon to be wielded in their quest for dominance. "You must accept your new role, human," she said softly, her eyes never wavering from the stars. "The power you now possess can either be your salvation or your destruction." He swallowed hard, feeling the unfamiliar energy coursing through his veins. "I don't know what you expect me to do," he admitted, his voice betraying his uncertainty. The leader turned toward him, her expression unreadable. "You are the key, as I've said before. Your very existence is now intertwined with the fate of the universe. We have battled for eons, fought against forces you cannot begin to comprehend. And now, with you by our side, we will tip the balance." He shook his head, trying to comprehend the magnitude of her words. "But why me? Why was I chosen? I was just a man. A spy." She placed a hand on his shoulder, and though her touch was light, it felt as though it carried the weight of the cosmos. "Because you carry within you a unique energy, a potential that even your own kind cannot see. Your dreams, your visions, they were not mere coincidences. They were the universe calling to you, preparing you for this moment." He took a step back, overwhelmed by the truth she revealed. The dreams he had experienced throughout his life, the voice calling to him from the void, it had all been leading to this. But what did it mean for his humanity? Was there any part of him left that wasn't already claimed by this alien force? "I don't want to lose who I am," he whispered, more to himself than to her. The leader's eyes softened slightly, but there was no pity in her voice when she replied, "You've already lost who you were. But in return, you've gained something far greater, immortality, power, and a purpose that stretches beyond the boundaries of any human life. The question is whether you will embrace it or fight against it." He stared at her, feeling the weight of her words, the weight of his new existence. In a way, she was right. He couldn't go back to the man he once was, but that didn't mean he had to abandon everything. There had to be a way to retain his humanity while wielding this newfound power. "I'll help you," he said slowly, the decision forming in his mind. "But on my terms." The leader's lips curved into a knowing smile. "We shall see." Chapter 9, The first mission days passed aboard the alien ship, and with each passing hour, he grew more accustomed to his new body, his new abilities. The transformation had granted him enhanced strength, speed, and intellect. His mind now operated on a level far beyond that of any human, and he could access information and knowledge stored in the ship's vast database with ease. Yet, even as he honed his abilities, the lingering question of what it meant to be human gnawed at him. He hadn't spoken much with the other aliens on the ship, most of whom viewed him with a mixture of curiosity and indifference. They saw him as a tool, just as their leader did, a means to an end. But one alien, a woman named Zyra, seemed different. She often watched him from a distance, her expression unreadable. Her blue skin shimmered in the same light as the others, but there was something more in her eyes, a depth of understanding that intrigued him. One day, as he trained in the ship's expansive gymnasium, pushing his new body to its limits, she approached him. "You struggle," Zyra said, her voice calm but with an edge of empathy. He wiped the sweat from his brow, though he suspected his new physiology made sweat unnecessary. "I don't know how to balance this. I'm not like you. I wasn't born into this life. I had a family, friends, a home." Zyra tilted her head, her luminous eyes narrowing slightly. "You are not like us. But that is why you are valuable." He frowned. "Valuable? To your mission, maybe. But what about to myself? What am I if not the man I used to be?" She took a step closer, her eyes locking onto his. "You are more than the man you were. But you are still him. The transformation didn't erase your past, it enhanced it. You carry your memories, your emotions, with you. They are your strength, not your weakness." Her words struck a chord within him, and for the first time since his transformation, he felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps there was a way to reconcile his old self with his new identity. Perhaps there was still a part of him worth saving. Before he could respond, the ship's intercom crackled to life, and the voice of the leader echoed through the chamber. "All personnel to the command deck. We have located the target." He felt a surge of adrenaline as Zyra's expression hardened. "It's time." Chapter 10, The Infiltration. The command deck was alive with activity as he and Zyra entered. The leader stood at the center of the room, her eyes fixed on the holographic display before her. The image of a distant planet, shrouded in clouds and mystery, floated in the air, a world that had been the center of conflict for millennia. "We have found them," the leader announced, her voice commanding the attention of everyone present. "The renegade faction responsible for the destabilization of our galaxy. And with our new ally," she glanced at him, "we will crush them once and for all." His heart pounded as he stared at the holographic planet. This was it, the moment he had been preparing for. But as the mission details unfolded, doubts crept into his mind. What exactly was he fighting for? And why did this mission feel more personal to the leader than any of the others had let on? As the team prepared for the mission, Zyra pulled him aside. "Be careful," she warned, her voice low. "The leader has her own agenda. Don't trust everything she tells you." He frowned, feeling a knot of tension form in his chest. "What do you mean?" Zyra hesitated, her eyes darting toward the leader. "There's more to this mission than she's revealed. I've seen the way she looks at you, the way she speaks about the key. You're important, but not in the way she wants you to believe. She's using you for something far greater than just this battle." His mind raced, trying to process her words. Could it be true? Could the leader's motivations go beyond the mission she had outlined? And if so, what was he really fighting for? Before he could ask more, the ship's alarms blared, signaling that they were approaching their destination. There was no more time for questions, only action. Chapter 11, Betrayal. The descent to the planet was swift and silent. He and Zyra, along with the rest of the strike team, moved through the dense atmosphere, cloaked by the ship's advanced stealth technology. The renegades were unaware of their approach, and the element of surprise was on their side. As they landed on the surface, the air was thick with tension. The mission was clear: eliminate the renegade leaders and secure the planet. But as they moved deeper into enemy territory, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't until they reached the heart of the enemy base that the truth was revealed. The leader, who had been at the front of the strike team, suddenly turned to face him, her eyes blazing with intensity. "Now, human," she said, her voice echoing through his mind. "It is time for you to fulfill your purpose." Before he could react, she reached out and touched his forehead, and in that moment, the truth flooded his consciousness that he wasn't just a key to the mission, he was the key to unlocking a power that had been sealed away for eons. A power that the leader had been seeking for herself, hidden within him since birth. She had orchestrated everything, his capture, his transformation, all to bring him to this moment. Betrayal burned in his chest as he realized the extent of her manipulation. But even as the anger surged within him, he felt the power she had unlocked coursing through his veins, more potent than anything he had ever imagined. The dense canopy of the ancient forest whispered with secrets as filtered sunlight flickered upon the glistening surface of a hidden lagoon. Eloan, the forest of eternal mysteries, was alive with magic, a realm both beautiful and treacherous. Amidst the water, their forms partially submerged, stood two figures, starkly contrasting in appearance, yet tethered by an unspoken bond. Part 1, The encounter. Asmira, a daughter of the moon, had long been a creature of the ethereal realms. With alabaster skin that shimmered under the soft light, and eyes reflecting the endless night sky, she possessed a haunting beauty. Her kin had warned her countless times to stay away from the enchanted forests of Eloan, but curiosity, as it often did, became her undoing. She moved through the forest like a ghost, her steps silent against the moss-covered earth. The forest had always called to her, its ancient energy tugging at her soul, and today, she finally yielded to its pull. It was here, at the edge of the lagoon, that she first laid eyes on him. Galdar, the guardian of Eloan, was a creature unlike any other. His skin was a tapestry of moss and bark, his muscles rippling beneath the living vines that coiled around his form. His eyes, glowing with the emerald hues of the forest, betrayed a sharp intellect and an otherworldly wisdom. A being born from the very earth, tasked with protecting the sacred grounds from any who dared threaten its balance. Their eyes met across the waters, and in that instant, the world seemed to hold its breath. You should not be here, Galdar's voice rumbled, deep and ancient, like the roots of an ancient tree stirring beneath the soil. Asmira tilted her head, her long, dark hair falling in wet strands around her shoulders. And yet, here I am. He stepped closer, the water parting easily for him. Leave, while you still can. Eloan is not kind to intruders. I am no intruder, Asmira countered. I seek no harm. Galdar's gaze softened for a moment, but the caution in his stance remained. No one comes to Eloan without wanting something. What is it you seek? She hesitated. She could feel the weight of the forest around her, the subtle shifts in the wind, as if the trees themselves were listening, waiting for her answer. I don't know. I was drawn here. A silence hung between them, and the sounds of the forest seemed to recede as if the land itself was listening to their exchange. Then perhaps, Galdar said quietly, his eyes locking with hers, it is the forest that seeks you. Part 2, The Bond. Days passed in a strange blur. Asmira found herself unable to leave the forest, even as she knew she should. There was a strange magic that clung to her like the dew on the morning leaves. And Galdar, for all his initial wariness, began to grow curious about this mysterious woman of the moon. Every day, they would meet at the lagoon, sometimes speaking, other times simply sitting in silence, watching the waters ripple and the light play across the trees. The forest, which had once seemed so daunting to Asmira, now felt almost familiar. And in Galdar's presence, she found a strange comfort. One afternoon, as they sat by the water's edge, Galdar spoke. Eloan is a place of balance, he began, his voice low. Everything here has its purpose. The trees, the rivers, the creatures, even me. I was born to protect it. Asmira glanced at him, her curiosity piqued. Protect it from what? From those who would seek to corrupt its power, he said, his expression darkening. Eloan is not just a forest, it's a living entity, a source of ancient magic. There are those who would try to harness that power for their own gain. She frowned. And you've been doing this, how long? Longer than I can remember, Galdar replied. Time moves differently here. Asmira hesitated before asking the next question, knowing it might stir something within him. And are you alone in this? He glanced at her, his eyes unreadable. I am. The last of my kind. She felt a pang in her chest. The thought of being alone, of carrying such a burden for so long, was unimaginable to her. And yet, there he was, steadfast in his duty. Perhaps you're not as alone as you think, Asmira said softly, her gaze meeting his. He didn't respond, but the look in his eyes spoke volumes. Part 3, shadows in the forest, but peace in Eloan was not eternal. The forest had felt the disturbance long before Galdar or Esmira sensed it. Dark forces, drawn by the power that pulsed through the land, had begun to stir. They were not creatures of the forest, but invaders from distant realms, their hearts filled with greed and malice. That it began with whispers in the wind, barely audible, but enough to set Galdar on edge. He could feel it in the earth beneath his feet, the way the trees shifted uneasily. Something was coming, and then, one night, they struck. Esmira had been sleeping in a small grove near the lagoon when she was jolted awake by a deafening roar. The ground shook beneath her, and the trees trembled as if the very earth was crying out in pain. She stumbled to her feet, her heart racing. Galdar. He was there in an instant, his form barely visible in the shadows, but his presence unmistakable. "Stay behind me," he commanded, his voice more serious than she had ever heard it. From the darkness of the forest, shapes began to emerge, twisted creatures, their forms unnatural and grotesque. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and their movements were jagged and erratic. Esmira's breath caught in her throat. "What are they?" "Corrupted beings," Galdar growled, his fists clenching. "They've come for the heart of Eloan." With a swift motion, Galdar stepped forward, his body transforming. Vines and roots sprouted from his skin, twisting and curling around his limbs like armor. He moved with the grace of a predator, each step purposeful and controlled. The creatures lunged at him, their claws outstretched, but Galdar was faster. With a wave of his hand, the ground beneath them erupted in a flurry of roots and vines, ensnaring them and pulling them back into the earth. But for every creature he defeated, more appeared. "We can't fight them all," Esmira said, her voice tinged with panic. Galdar's eyes flickered to her, and for the first time, she saw something she never thought she would see in him: fear. "We don't need to," he said, his voice tight. "We need to protect the heart." Without another word, he grabbed her hand and pulled her deeper into the forest, the sounds of battle fading behind them. Esmira's mind raced. She had never seen Galdar like this, so desperate, so vulnerable. "The heart?" she asked, struggling to keep up with him. "Eloan's source of power," he explained, his breath labored. "If they reach it, the forest will fall." Part 4, The Heart of Eloan. The deeper they went into the forest, the stranger the landscape became. The trees grew taller, their trunks wider, and the air was thick with magic. It was as if they had stepped into another realm entirely. The center of it all, nestled in a clearing surrounded by towering trees, was the heart of Eloan, a massive, glowing crystal embedded in the earth, pulsing with an ethereal light. The very air around it hummed with power. Galdar slowed as they approached, his eyes locked on the crystal. "This is what they seek." Esmira could feel the pull of the heart, its energy coursing through her veins. It was overwhelming, intoxicating, and terrifying. "We need to protect it," Galdar said, his voice low. "No matter the cost." Before she could respond, the ground trembled beneath them, and the air was filled with the sound of cracking branches. The creatures had found them. They poured into the clearing, their grotesque forms illuminated by the light of the heart. Galdar stepped forward, his body once again transforming into a living weapon, but this time, Esmira didn't stand idly by. She could feel the magic of the heart resonating within her, and without thinking, she reached out with her mind, calling upon its power. The air around her shimmered, and suddenly, she was surrounded by a glowing barrier of light. The creatures shrieked as they collided with the barrier, their forms disintegrating upon impact. Galdar glanced back at her, his eyes wide with shock. You're controlling it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how," Esmira admitted, her voice shaking. "It just happened." Galdar's gaze softened, and for the first time since she had met him, he smiled. "You were meant to be here," he said quietly. "Eloan chose you." Esmira's heart raced. She had always felt a connection to the forest, but she had never understood why. Now, standing before the heart of Eloan, she realized the truth. She was a part of this place, just as much as Galdar was. Together, they fought off the remaining creatures, their combined strength more than enough to protect the heart. The battle was fierce, but in the end, they stood victorious, the clearing once again peaceful. As the last of the corrupted beings disintegrated into the earth, Galdar turned to Esmira, his expression unreadable. "You saved Aloan," he said softly. Esmira shook her head. "We saved it." He stepped closer to her, his hand gently brushing against hers. "You are no longer an outsider. You are one of us now." Esmira felt a warmth spread through her chest. For the first time in her life, she felt like she had found a place where she truly belonged. Part 5, A New Beginning. In the days that followed, the forest slowly began to heal. The scars of the battle faded, and the creatures of Aloan returned to their peaceful existence. But for Galdar and Esmira, everything had changed. They spent their days together, exploring the deepest corners of the forest, learning its secrets, and growing closer with each passing moment. The bond between them, once tentative, had blossomed into something far deeper, a connection forged not just by magic, but by trust and understanding. Esmira had become a guardian of Aloan, just as Galdar had been for so many years. But unlike him, she was not alone. Together, they would protect the heart of the forest, ensuring that its magic remained pure and untouched. And as the sun set over the lagoon, casting a golden glow across the water, Esmira turned to Galdar with a smile. "Thank you," she said softly. He raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For showing me that I belong here." Galdar's eyes softened, and he reached out to gently cup her cheek. "You always belonged here. You just needed to find your way." They stood together, hand in hand, as the forest around them whispered with the promise of a new beginning, a future where they would stand side by side, not as strangers, but as equals. The forest of Aloan had chosen them both. The Guardians of Aloan, Shadows of the Past. Part 6, Whispers of the Ancients. The nights in Aloan grew quieter after the battle. The creatures of the forest began to return to their usual routines, and the lagoon shimmered under the light of the moon as if untouched by the chaos that had transpired. But Esmira couldn't shake a feeling of unease. Despite the peace that had settled, something deep within the forest called to her, a whisper of a past she had yet to uncover. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Esmira found herself wandering deeper into Aloan, her footsteps guided by an unseen force. Galdar had noticed her restlessness but had chosen to give her space, knowing the forest had a way of revealing its secrets in time. She followed a path barely visible, overgrown with vines and tangled roots, until she stumbled upon something unexpected, a stone altar, ancient and weathered, half buried beneath a canopy of trees. The carvings on the altar were worn with age, but as Esmira knelt to inspect them, she felt a strange familiarity. Her fingers traced the symbols etched into the stone, and with each touch, a wave of energy surged through her. The air around her grew dense with magic, and for a brief moment, she saw a vision, a battle long past, creatures of darkness engulfing the land, and Galdar, not alone but surrounded by others of his kind. Her breath caught in her throat. Galdar was not the last, as he had believed. The vision faded, leaving her shaken. She hurried back to the lagoon, her mind racing with questions. As she approached, she saw Galdar waiting for her, his tall figure silhouetted against the fading light. "You felt it, didn't you?" he asked quietly, his voice carrying a weight of knowledge. Esmira nodded. "There's something more here, something ancient. I saw others like you." "What happened to them, Galdar? Where are they?" His gaze darkened, and for a long moment, he was silent. "They're gone, Esmira. Long before you or I came to be. The Guardians of Aloan, we were many once, each bound to the forest and its heart. But a great darkness came, a force so powerful it wiped out most of my kind. I survived, barely, but the others, they gave their lives to protect Aloan." Esmira's heart ached for him, for the loneliness he must have felt all these years. "But I saw them," she insisted. "In the vision. Could they still be out there?" Galdar shook his head. "Visions are tricky things, Esmira. They show what could have been, not always what is. I've searched for them before, but I've found nothing." Esmira's resolve hardened. "Then we search again. Together." Part 7, The journey begins the next morning. Esmira and Galdar set off on a new journey, venturing to the farthest reaches of Aloan. The forest stretched far beyond the lagoon, with landscapes that seemed to shift and change as they moved deeper. Towering mountains rose in the distance, and rivers of pure, shimmering magic flowed like veins through the land. As they journeyed, Galdar began to teach Esmira more about Aloan's history. She learned of the ancient guardians who had come before them, each tied to the elements of the forest. Some had control over the trees, others over water, fire, and air. Galdar, being born from the earth itself, was the strongest of his kind, bound to the roots and rocks that sustained the forest. "You're different from them," Galdar said one evening as they camped beside a glowing river. "Your connection to Aloan is unique. The heart of the forest responds to you in a way it never did to the others." Esmira frowned. "Why?" "I don't know," Galdar admitted. "But I intend to find out." The deeper they traveled, the more they uncovered. Ancient ruins dotted the landscape, remnants of a time when the guardians thrived. Esmira could feel the echoes of their power, still lingering in the stones and trees. But with each discovery came new dangers. Dark creatures, twisted by the same force that had destroyed the guardians, stalked their every step. One night, as they rested beneath the stars, Esmira spoke of her vision again. "I saw something else," she said quietly. "A figure in the shadows. I couldn't make out who they were, but I think they're watching us." Galdar's expression grew tense. "It could be the same force that corrupted the creatures. Or it could be something else," Esmira countered. "Someone else." Part 8. The Shadow's descent. Days turned into weeks as Esmira and Galdar pressed forward, determined to uncover the truth about the ancient guardians and the mysterious force that had destroyed them. Along the way, they encountered creatures both wondrous and terrifying, massive tree spirits that towered over the landscape, and shadowy beings that lurked in the corners of the forest, waiting to strike. It was during one such encounter that they finally learned the truth. They had been traveling through a dense thicket of trees when a figure appeared before them, tall, cloaked in darkness, and exuding an aura of immense power. The figure's eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and as they stepped closer, Esmira could feel the ground trembled beneath her feet. "Who are you?" Galdar demanded, stepping protectively in front of Esmira. The figure smiled, a cold, twisted expression. "I am the one who brought ruin to your kind, guardian." Esmira's heart pounded in her chest. This was the force she had seen in her vision, the one who had destroyed the guardians. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear bubbling inside her. The figure's gaze shifted to her, and for a moment, they seemed almost curious. "You are different," they said, their voice low and dangerous. "The heart of Aloan responds to you." "Why?" "I don't know," Esmira replied, her eyes narrowing. "But I intend to find out." The figure's smile widened. "Then perhaps we will meet again, Moonchild." And with that, they vanished, leaving Esmira and Galdar standing alone in the darkness. Part 9. The Awakening. As they continued their journey, Esmira couldn't shake the feeling that something within her was changing. The heart of Aloan called to her more strongly with each passing day, and her connection to the forest deepened in ways she couldn't explain. It was during a particularly treacherous climb through the mountains that it happened. They had been scaling a steep cliff, the air thin and cold around them, when Esmira suddenly felt a surge of energy rush through her. Her vision blurred, and for a brief moment, she felt as though she was floating above the forest, looking down at the world from a great height. When her vision cleared, she realized she was no longer on the mountain. She was standing in a vast, open field, the sky above her a brilliant shade of purple, and the ground beneath her feet glowing with a soft, golden light. In the distance, she could see figures moving, tall, majestic beings, their forms shimmering with magic, and at the center of it all was a tree, massive and ancient, its branches stretching high into the sky. "The heart of Aloan." "You are not ready," a voice echoed around her, and she turned to see the figure from her vision standing before her once again. "But you will be soon." Before she could respond, the vision faded, and she was back on the mountain. Galdar staring at her in shock. "What just happened?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. Esmira shook her head, her heart racing. I don't know. But I think the heart is trying to tell me something. Part 10, the final stand. The closer they got to the heart of Eloan, the more intense Esmira's visions became. She could feel the magic of the forest coursing through her veins, guiding her toward something important. And then, one day, they reached it. The tree from her vision stood before them, massive and awe-inspiring, its branches reaching high into the sky. The heart of Eloan pulsed at its center, glowing with a brilliant light. But they were not alone. The figure from before stood at the base of the tree, their eyes locked on the heart, a twisted smile on their face. You have come, they said, their voice cold and cruel. But you are too late. Esmira stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. I won't let you take it. The figure laughed, a sound that sent chills down her spine. You cannot stop me, Moonchild. The heart belongs to me now. But as the figure reached for the heart, something strange happened. Esmira felt a surge of energy rush through her, stronger than anything she had ever felt before. The ground beneath her feet trembled, and the air around her crackled with magic. And then, with a blinding flash of light, the heart of Eloan responded to her call. The figure screamed as they were engulfed in a wave of pure energy, their form disintegrating into nothingness. The forest around them shuddered, and then, silence. Esmira stood frozen, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She had done it. She had saved Eloan. Galdar stepped up beside her, his expression a mixture of awe and disbelief. You're the true guardian, he said quietly, his voice filled with wonder. Esmira turned to him, her eyes glowing with the light of the heart. We are the guardians, Galdar. Together. And as they stood before the heart of Eloan, hand in hand, they knew that their journey was far from over. The forest still held many secrets, and there were still dangers lurking in the shadows. But now, they were ready to face whatever came next, as equals, as protectors, as the last guardians of Eloan.